So the first step, as we know, is identifying all risks, say in food supply chains, which is not a trivial exercise. Let me tell you, it takes at least a month or so to even just identifying the risk, and if the company is really considering this to be a top priority, and the managers sort of get together in workshops and meetings and discussions, and it takes at least a month, maybe even more, to really identify the risk in their food supply chains. But normally, again, it will be relatively easy if we try to do this by the supply chain processes. So we can identify demand-related risk. We can talk about sourcing or procurement-related risk, which is actually quite significant, because a lot of it is the suppliers are very actively involved in this supply chain. There can be internal manufacturing. It can be with the company or with the contract manufacturers, logistics-related risk, and storage-related risk. So if you look at this process, this is obviously not the only way to identifying risk. There can be, people can talk about very broadly market risk or operational risk or financial risk and so on. But if you focus on supply chain, then it's probably easy to do this from a supply chain process perspective. So we can use demand, sourcing, manufacturing, logistics, and storage. We can also follow the SCORE process of maybe planning, sourcing, and so on, manufacturing, distribution, logistics, the SCORE processes. But that itself is a relatively lengthy exercise. And if you're a student, if you're a company trying to do this for the first time, I will seriously recommend that you follow some of these basic guidelines and try to identify the risks. And when I also teach this, I ask students to sort of think about this, what are the potential risks which might face. But in the interest of time here, I will sort of give you some of my ideas. Each company might have their own thoughts around this. But some of the demand-related risks may be obviously some forecasting errors, some uncertainty related to the demand of new products, a bullwhip effect happening in the supply chain, so you don't really have demand visibility, which is sort of creating demand distortion. There are a lot of risks related to sourcing, maybe supplier quality, supplier not being able to deliver on time, a complete supply failure, something happens in the supplier processes, or a lack of traceability, some lack of ethical or social practices, some environmental risk, lead time variability, a breach of contract, and so on. So these are just representative. Each company obviously has to do this on their own. There are obviously also some risks within the manufacturing processes. As we all know, there can be equipment breakdowns, there can be poor quality, there can be labor strikes, or maybe there is a new technology which is coming up which actually makes the old processing technology obsolete. Maybe there is a government regulation to switch on to more environmentally friendly technologies and so on. That can be also potential risk for the company if they're not really aware of it. Over and underutilization of capacity, higher unpredictable lead times, or low yield in the manufacturing process. Similarly, logistics is also equally critical. And there are, I know, large companies where errors happen in shipping. There can be temperature abuse. That means temperature, what is optimal temperature for logistics is not maintained. There can be contamination from one product to another if they're not really, if some packaging sort of distorts or breaks and so on. There can be transportation breakdown. There can be transportation cost variability. There can be delay in transportation. Again, lack of capacity in the ports. So many things can possibly go wrong. And I know some large companies which is probably shipping huge volume of processed meat products from, say, Europe to Asia, and they sometimes say that in the ship maybe that there is a temperature variation which happens. There is nothing really too much under their control, but the quality differs, and sometimes again when it is landed in the destination, the customer does a quality check and finds it is not good, so entire shipment has to be taken back. So it's a colossal waste. Sometimes even shipping errors happen. A simple typing error or a manual error in something actually giving the specification of the product might result in the entire cancellation of the shipment. A customer, for example, Japanese customers, or the Japanese authorities in the port, they will reject if they see any mismatch between what is being shipped and what is there in the data sheet of the product. And even if nothing in the product is wrong, just because of wrong documentation, the entire shipment may be rejected, which is obviously which is prudent, because the product is food, which is affecting people, and if you don't really know what is there inside the product, which is not really matching what it should be, then obviously many times it can be a huge waste. There can be also risk related to storage, storage capacity mismatch, particularly sometimes in high sale season, festive seasons, etc. Poor storage conditions, again temperature variations happening, some hazard, some fire or something in storage conditions. Obviously, also sometimes if it's not a perishable food, sometimes inventory costs. If you keep them, if you don't those are not really sold, and so on. But these are, again, as I said, these are representative risks. Many companies will have to do this exercise on their own, be it a food retailer, be it a food processing company. It's the first exercise to really get their thoughts together, get their minds together in sort of what are the real risks which we face in the supply chain. And that can be many. If you look at this, may be a list of 25 or 30 risks which we have identified. Now the question is, what do we do next? What do we do after that? Shall we work on all of these risks? How do we know that these really affect the performance? And unless the top management really sees the linkage of all this risk to corporate performance, be it revenue growth or profitability or inventory turnover or something, it sometimes becomes very difficult for management to really put resources in addressing this risk or even have a risk management program. So there's a clear need to create a business case or emphasize the linkage of this risk to some corporate performance. And that's what we have also done, and I will give you some insights on that. But many times, this is just the list of those same risks in a tabular form, and you also see some performance measures here. And I've listed them from, say, 1 to 24 risks and 3 performance measures here. Why are linked performance measures? Because we also need to link those risks to performance measures. And suppose you are creating a business case, you want to prioritize this risk, this is a useful approach to take. What you will also notice is that many of these risks are interrelated. One risk sort of impacts another risk, and together they have a stronger impact, sort of stronger negative impact. It's very important to understand these interrelationships between the risk, because together the individual effect may not be very strong, but together they can have a very devastating effect. That's why the volcano analogy also sometimes works well. So it may be something happening deep inside the earth, in the magma, and then some pressure variation happens, and some lava somehow comes out of some fissure, and then it also triggers some chain reaction of many different things. These almost similar things which can happen. Maybe a very small process variation happen in some supplier during transportation, but if it's not detected or not really worked upon, it can have a very strong negative impact later on, and a product recall might happen. So it's important to understand these interrelationships between the risks. And how do we do that? Okay, I will take you through some basic steps in that process.